The streets of Silverpine are silent under a blanket of falling snow, a silence that hides secrets. Ethan Ward, a wounded soldier, trudges through the cold night, thinking he's reached his end. But then a sound is heard, tiny footsteps crunching in the snow. From the mist emerge two little girls in pink sweaters, their faces pale, their arms tightly clasped together, beside a German shepherd with fiery eyes. The dog presses against Ethan's chest, keeping him from falling, while the twins whisper, "Please, don't let them find us." In that moment, Ethan realizes he's not stumbled upon a stranger. He's entered a story of survival in a mysterious bond that will shake the city of Silverpine. The snow had a way of swallowing sound in Silverpine, softening the town's jagged edges until only silence remained. The forest stretched like a cathedral of pines, their branches heavy with frost, bending beneath winter's weight. The air smelled of resin and iron, a sharp reminder of the mountain's old scars and the secrets it still kept. The frozen creek wound through the trees like a ribbon of glass, catching the dim moonlight. It was along this edge of wilderness, far beyond the main road and the faint glow of town lanterns, that the Whitmore twins wandered. Clara Whitmore, the older by 4 minutes, carried herself with the kind of stubbornness rarely found in children. Her pale face was framed by waves of tangled blonde hair, and her blue eyes carried a sharpness that seemed too old for 7 years. She wore a pink wool sweater, stretched at the sleeves and patched at the elbows, a garment once new but long faded through winters of hand-me-down use. Eliza, her sister, clung close at her side. Eliza's features were softer, round cheeks, still dusted with freckles, lips often parted as if caught in constant wonder. Where Clara's gaze was defiant, Eliza's was gentle, often downcast, betraying the bruises of a spirit pressed too often by neglect. The two were inseparable, not only because they were twins, but because they had learned early that, in their house, only each other could be trusted. Their mother had died 3 winters ago, and with her went the warmth of home. Their father, a logger, followed not long after, lost to an accident in the mills. Since then, the girls had lived with Marjorie, their stepmother, a woman whose bitterness seemed carved into her very bones. Marjorie's beauty had once turned heads in Silverpine thick auburn hair, high cheekbones, and a proud carriage, but time and disappointment had hardened her. She treated the twins not as children, but as burdens, feeding them cold scraps and keeping her affection locked away. It was Shadow, the German shepherd their father had raised from a pup, who became their true guardian. Shadow, now 8 years old, was large and broad-shouldered, his sable coat streaked with gray at the muzzle. His left ear bore a notch from a fight with a wolf in his youth, and his amber eyes watched everything with a soldier's vigilance. He slept at the foot of the girls' bed, followed them through the streets, and in many ways carried their father's spirit, his loyalty, his protectiveness, his quiet strength. That evening, Clara had convinced Eliza to follow her into the woods, away from Marjorie's cold stares and cruel mutterings. The snow was fresh, untouched, and Shadow bounded through it with joyful power, kicking up white spray with each leap. The twins giggled at first, chasing after him, their breath rising in plumes against the dark. But as they pushed deeper into the forest, the trees pressed in, and the silence grew thicker, broken only by the crunch of their boots. Clara liked to pretend she was braver than she felt, but Eliza gripped her hand tighter, unwilling to admit her fear aloud. To her, the woods held both magic and menace. They were a place where their father's stories lingered, tales of deer trails, hidden cabins, and the whisper of spirits, but also a place where shadows stretched too long. Shadow suddenly froze. His body stiffened, head lifted, ears angled forward. His hackles rose like a ridge along his spine. The growl that hummed in his chest was low and warning. Clara's heart jumped, and she tightened her hold on Eliza's hand. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, echoing the words she'd heard her father use countless times. Shadow didn't answer. He bolted toward the creek, paws silent despite his size, weaving between the trees with precision. The twins exchanged a glance before chasing after him, their small boots stumbling in the deep snow. They found him standing rigid by the frozen bank, his nose pressed toward a shape collapsed in the powder. At first, the girls thought it was a fallen tree branch, dark against the white. Then they saw the shape of shoulders, the glint of metal, the ragged rise and fall of shallow breath. It was a man sprawled across the snow as if struck down mid-step. His olive green jacket was torn at the side, the fabric stiff with blood. His face was half buried in the snow, a beard flecked with ice crystals, and his hand clutched a pack that had slipped open, spilling a map half soaked in crimson. Shadow circled him once, then pressed his body firmly against the man's chest, as if trying to keep his heat alive. Clara bent down, brushing snow from his face. He was older than her father had been, maybe mid-30s. His skin was pale, his jaw sharp, his lips cracked. A scar cut across his right eyebrow, and another older one traced his jawline, faded but still visible in the moonlight. When she placed her ear near his lips, she heard the faint rasp of air, a whisper that sounded almost like a word. "Run!" But Clara did not run. Eliza whimpered, tugging at her sister's arm. "Clara, we should go. He looks scary." Clara shook her head, her stubborn streak igniting. "He's hurt. We can't just leave him." Shadow pressed closer, his muzzle nudging the man's chest, a low whine echoing his urgency. Clara looked at her dog, at his eyes sharp with insistence, and felt the weight of something greater than choice. This man had been placed in their path, not by accident, but by fate. His name was Ethan Ward, though the twins would not learn it until later. Once he had been a soldier in a special operations unit, serving in wars that left their mark on his body and soul. His broad shoulders carried invisible weight, memories of comrades lost, missions unfinished, and orders that blurred the line between justice and betrayal. Now he lived under a different mission, one that brought him to Silverpine under the guise of anonymity. He was tracking a drug ring that stretched across borders, a syndicate whose reach had spread even into quiet towns like theirs. But the ambush had come faster than he expected, and the bullet lodged in his side had nearly ended his story on that frozen creek. Clara looked at Eliza, then at Shadow. "Help me," she said simply. And together, two small girls, their dog, and the echo of their father's spirit began to drag Ethan through the snow, toward the cabin they sometimes used as a secret hideout. The cabin had once belonged to a trapper long gone, its walls patched with rough timber, its roof sagging under years of snow. To the twins, it was a place of imagination, where they pretended to be queens or explorers. Tonight, it became a sanctuary. Inside, the cabin smelled of smoke and pine sap. The hearth was cold, but Clara knew how to strike flint. She'd watched her father once, long ago, and though her hands shook, the spark caught. Eliza gathered kindling with Shadow's help, the dog dragging dry branches from the corner. Soon a small flame crackled, throwing light across the man's face. Ethan groaned, his gray eyes fluttering open. For a moment they were sharp, like steel drawn in battle, and he tried to sit, only to collapse again with a muffled cry. Clara pressed a hand against his shoulder. "Don't move. You're safe. We'll help you." Ethan's gaze darted between the children, then lingered on the dog. Recognition flickered in his eyes, not of Shadow himself, but of the loyalty in his stance, the soldier's bearing that only another fighter could understand. "Why, are you here?" he rasped. Clara lifted her chin. "Because you needed us." Outside the forest sighed, branches heavy with snow creaking in the night. Somewhere beyond, unseen eyes might have been searching, but for now the cabin was a world of its own. Two girls, a soldier, and a dog bound together by chance and something more. It was not comfort they found in that firelight, but purpose. And though they did not yet know it, the discovery by the creek was the first step into a battle that would test not just their survival, but the very soul of Silverpine. The cabin's walls groaned against the cold, timbers swelling with frost, as if the little structure itself were struggling to breathe. Shadows flickered from the fire Clara had managed to build, throwing long silhouettes across the warped boards. The scent of smoke mixed with damp earth and pine sap, a fragile warmth against the relentless night pressing in from outside. Ethan Ward lay stretched across an old cot, his broad frame barely fitting, his olive jacket peeled away to reveal a dark stain spreading across his side. Shadow, the German shepherd, curled at his ribs, his great chest rising and falling with a soldier's steadiness. Each time Ethan drifted near unconsciousness, the dog would nudge him back, a low whine in his throat, as though he understood that letting the man slip too far would mean losing him. Clara knelt nearby, blue eyes wide but determined, tearing strips from her own sweater hem to bind the wound. Her fingers were clumsy but her resolve fierce, the kind of stubborn will her father once admired. Eliza sat at her side, holding a tin cup of melted snow, her small hands trembling with the weight of responsibility. For a moment, they were no longer just children, they were keepers of life. Ethan stirred, his gray eyes blinking open, sharp at first with suspicion. His instincts flared, trained by years of soldiering and missions where trust had been a dangerous luxury. He saw two girls in tattered pink sweaters, cheeks smudged with ash, their faces pale from cold yet lit with a fire he hadn't seen in children for years. And he saw the dog, steady, loyal, guarding him like a sentinel. Slowly, suspicion gave way to recognition, not of their faces, but of the courage they carried. "You should have left me," he rasped, his voice low, cracked by thirst and pain. Clara's chin lifted. "And let you die? We're not like her." Her words slipped before she thought, but Ethan caught the bitterness. His gaze narrowed. "Her?" The twins exchanged a glance, silent. It was Eliza who whispered, "Our stepmother. She doesn't care." The words broke like fragile glass, and in the silence that followed, the wind rattled the shutters as though confirming them. Ethan studied the girls again, understanding something of their loneliness. His own memories pressed forward unbidden of his mother, stern but fair, who died before he turned 18, leaving him to enlist, desperate for belonging. Of commanders who used loyalty like currency, then abandoned men when the cost grew high. Perhaps fate had tied them together here, each bearing scars too heavy for their age. He shifted, grimacing, then muttered, "I was ambushed. Not by strangers, men with badges, uniforms that should have meant safety. Instead, they wanted me dead." Clara's brows knitted. "Why?" "Because I was too close," Ethan said, eyes fixed on the fire. "There's a network drugs, weapons threads running through this town. I was tracing it. Someone decided I got too close to pulling it apart." He coughed, the sound raw, and Shadow pressed harder against him, warmth seeping into his side. Ethan's hand moved instinctively to the dog's neck, fingers brushing the thick fur. "He knows," Ethan whispered. "Dogs always know when danger's near." As if on cue, Shadow's head lifted, ears twitching. A low growl vibrated in his chest. The dog padded to the door, nose pressed against the crack. Clara and Eliza froze, holding their breath. Outside, the forest moaned under the wind. But there was something else, something heavier than snow, softer than branches. Footsteps. They faded quickly, leaving only silence. But Shadow's hackles remained raised. Ethan tensed, his soldier's instincts screaming that their fragile refuge had already been noticed. While Ethan tried to calm his breathing, Clara busied herself searching his coat, desperate for anything useful. She pulled free a crumpled scrap of paper from an inside pocket. The ink was smeared with blood, but the words remained legible. "Drop site D7, December 19th, W." Clara frowned, lips moving as she whispered the letters to herself. She didn't understand, but instinct told her it mattered. She tucked it into her pocket, deciding to ask Ethan later when his strength returned. For now, she would guard it like a secret. Eliza, more sensitive to feelings than words, sat quietly watching Ethan's face. She saw beyond the soldier's hard jaw, beyond the scars and gray eyes, into the exhaustion carved into his features. He was not only injured, he was haunted. "Does it hurt?" she asked softly. Ethan blinked, surprised by the gentleness. "Yes," he admitted, "but not all pain comes from bullets." His voice carried weight, and though the girls didn't fully understand, they felt the truth. The hours crawled by. Snow thickened outside, muffling the world, trapping the cabin in a bubble of white silence. Clara dozed against the wall, Eliza's head resting on her shoulder, while Shadow kept watch by the door, his golden eyes unblinking. Ethan, left in uneasy half-sleep, drifted through fragments of memory. Faces of comrades lost in Afghanistan. A man named Wallace Kane, his commanding officer then, who had smiled while sending men into impossible missions. The same name had surfaced in his current investigation, a coincidence too sharp to ignore. It was Wallace's hand he suspected behind the ambush. Wallace, who still pulled strings with invisible wires. At dawn, the fire burned low. Ethan struggled upright, sweat beading his forehead, determined to move despite the pain. "I can't stay here," he muttered. "If they find me, they'll find you too." Clara shook her head fiercely. "Then we'll help you hide." "Shadow won't let them through." The dog wagged his tail once, slow but certain, as if swearing allegiance. Ethan looked at the three of them, the stubborn girl, the timid sister, the loyal dog, and felt something he hadn't in years. Not just responsibility, but belonging. Perhaps he had been placed in these woods not to die, but to be found. The town of Silverpine lived on whispers. Its snow-caked streets carried stories faster than the wind, and by the third day after Ethan Ward's discovery in the woods, rumors had reached every corner. At the baker's stall, men muttered about a stranger seen dragging through the trees. In the tavern, where hunters warmed their bones by the fire, talk shifted to shadows moving too quick for deer. And in the sheriff's office, guarded smiles passed between men who knew more than they said. A wounded soldier hiding in the forest was no accident. It was a problem, and in Silverpine, problems never stayed secret for long. Ethan felt the pressure tightening with every hour. The cabin had become both sanctuary and trap, a fragile shell too close to the eyes and ears of the town. By day, Clara and Eliza kept to the hearth, whispering plans and feeding Shadow scraps of bread crusts. By night, the dog's ears twitched at every sound, his body stiffening when wind rattled branches or snow slipped from the roof. Ethan, though still weak, forced himself to pace the narrow space, the restlessness of a man used to battle gnawing at him. "They'll come," he muttered once, more to himself than to the girls. "And when they do, this place won't hold." It was Shadow who confirmed his fears. One midnight, with the fire low and the twins asleep, the German shepherd growled deep, his nose pressed hard to the door seam. Ethan moved fast, rifle in hand, muscles screaming from the wound but instincts steady. Through the crack in the shutter, he caught movement. Two figures, half buried in the snowdrift, crouched near the tree line. Their uniforms carried the outline of lawmen, but their posture betrayed them. No patrol crept like wolves. These were hunters. "Wake them," Ethan hissed. Clara stirred first, her stubborn eyes flashing awake. Eliza clutched her sister's hand, trembling. "What is it?" she whispered. "We're leaving," Ethan said. He looked to Shadow. "Find us a way." The dog darted to the back wall, pawing at the floorboards near a pile of rotting crates. Ethan knelt, pushing them aside, revealing a hatch long forgotten. It led downward into the earth, the smell of old stone and damp air wafting up. An abandoned mine tunnel, the veins of Silverpine stretched for miles beneath the mountain, carved by men chasing copper decades ago. Now it was salvation. The descent was narrow. Ethan lowered himself first, wincing, then reached up to guide the twins down. Shadow leapt after them with a soft thud. Above, the cabin door creaked, footsteps stomping across the porch. A man's voice called out, low but commanding, "Search it!" "He's here," boards groaned as boots stomped inside. Ethan pressed a finger to his lips. In silence, the small band slipped deeper into the tunnel, the dark closing around them. The air inside was cold and stale, but Ethan's hand on the damp wall guided them forward. Clara walked close at his side, her small face set in defiance, while Eliza clung to Shadow's fur, comforted by his warmth. The dog moved with certainty, nose low, leading them like he knew the tunnels by memory. Their footsteps echoed against stone until finally, faint daylight seeped ahead. They emerged in a thicket at the base of an old quarry, far from the cabin. Behind them, gunshots cracked faintly warning shots, not yet pursuit, but close enough to make the girls' breaths quicken. "Why are they after you?" Clara demanded when they paused to rest. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow, his face pale under the gray light. "Because I carry something they want destroyed," he said. He did not tell them yet about the USB hidden in his gear, or the network reaching deeper than Silverpine soil. He only said, "Men who wear uniforms but follow money instead of law." Eliza shivered, her voice soft. "But uniforms are supposed to keep us safe." Ethan looked at her, seeing the raw innocence still clinging to her words. "They're supposed to," he said gently. "But sometimes evil puts on a badge to hide its face. And it's up to those who know the truth to drag it into the light." Far from the forest in a small house on Pine Row, Marjorie Whitmore drew the curtains shut. She was in her late 30s, her auburn hair coiled tightly in a bun, her face sharp with beauty that had soured into severity. Her pale skin was lined not from age but from worry and resentment, and her green eyes shifted with suspicion whenever spoken to. She had not asked to raise two daughters that were not hers, yet the small stipend left from their father's death kept her tied. Now she had found another way to profit. On the table lay an envelope of cash crisp bills, heavy for a town like Silverpine. She traced them with manicured nails, a bitter smile on her lips. The money came from a man named Creighton, one of Wallace Kane's lieutenants, who visited under cover of night. He was large, with thinning blonde hair and a scar twisting down his left cheek, his thick frame wrapped in a deputy's jacket that lent him false authority. Years ago, in a drunken brawl at the mill, Shadow had lunged at him, teeth tearing into his forearm. He had never forgiven the dog, nor the family that raised him. Now he paid Marjorie to keep her eyes sharp, her mouth silent, and, if chance allowed, to separate the girls from their canine protector. Marjorie told herself it was survival, that a woman alone in a town run by men needed protection. But in truth, bitterness had hollowed her. The girls were reminders of a man she had married for stability, not love, and lost before she could reap the benefit. Shadow's loyalty to them was a thorn in her side, his presence undermining her authority. Money, at least, never barked back. Back in the quarry, Ethan forced himself to keep moving, though pain lanced with every step. The tunnels had bought them time, but not safety. Clara held the scrap of paper she'd found days earlier. "Drop Site D7, December 19th, W." Her small fingers curling protectively around it. She didn't yet grasp its meaning, but she sensed it was the thread that tied Ethan's danger to their own. As night fell again, they reached a hollow in the rocks where an old rail cart lay rusting, a reminder of Silverpine's mining days. Ethan sank against it, breath ragged. Shadow pressed against him once more, a living wall of strength. The twins huddled close, their small bodies trembling less from cold than from the enormity of what they'd stepped into. Ethan looked at them and finally said, "You didn't ask for this, but you've shown more courage than most soldiers I knew. If you stay with me, the road will be dangerous. But maybe together, we stand a chance." Clara's eyes burned with determination. "We're not leaving you," she said. Eliza nodded softly, pressing her cheek to Shadow's fur. For a long moment, the four of them sat together in silence, the snow falling around them like ash. Somewhere in the distance, the town lights glimmered faintly. But Silverpine was no longer the safe place the twins once believed. It was a town of shadows, and the line between lawman and outlaw had blurred beyond recognition. The mine opened before them like the mouth of some sleeping beast, jagged stone teeth framing the entrance, its breath the stale draft that carried out a bitter tang of rust, chemicals, and old earth. The rails of a forgotten cart line stretched into the dark, half buried under snow and pine needles, their metal edges glinting faintly under the moonlight. Ethan paused at the edge, rifle across his shoulder, his jaw taut beneath a sheen of cold sweat. The wound in his side ached with every breath, but determination pressed him forward. He had seen too much in battle to mistake coincidence. There was a reason the tunnels remained guarded by shadows. Clara clutched Eliza's hand as they peered into the darkness. "It smells bad," Eliza whispered, wrinkling her nose. Clara squeezed tighter. "Bad usually means secrets." Their pink sweaters, already stained with ash and dirt, looked small and fragile against the looming black of the shaft. Yet their eyes glowed with something fiercer, fear threaded with courage. Shadow moved first. The German shepherd lowered his head and padded into the mine, paws soundless, muscles tense beneath his sable coat. His amber eyes cut through the dark, tail stiff, ears flicking at every drip of water, echoing off stone. Ethan followed, motioning the twins close behind. Inside, the tunnel walls wept with moisture, the ceiling low enough that Ethan had to stoop. Their breaths condensed in the cold, the small plumes floating upward like ghostly signals. They moved slowly, each step crunching against gravel and discarded debris. Then the tunnel widened. The faint glow of electric lamps revealed itself, wired crudely along the stone walls. The light hummed, unnatural in this place, illuminating crates stacked along one side. Ethan signaled for silence, his hand raised. He moved forward, prying one crate open with the butt of his rifle. Inside, plastic-wrapped packets gleamed beneath the dim bulbs. He tore one corner open. Powder spilled, white as the snow outside but deadlier than any storm. "Fentanyl," Ethan muttered. "Enough to poison a city." The girls stared, uncomprehending but sensing the danger in his tone. Shadow growled, pacing the perimeter, his nose twitching. Ethan's eyes swept further, catching glints of steel rifles, handguns, magazines stacked beside the narcotics. It wasn't just a stash, it was a depot, an operation buried beneath Silverpine soil. On a rickety table, among ledgers stained with damp, Ethan found something that froze him more than the drugs or the guns. A leather-bound notebook, its cover embossed with the insignia of law enforcement. Inside, neat handwriting listed names, dates, routes, and at the bottom of one page, circled in ink, was a name he knew too well. Deputy Marshal Wallace Kane. The letters burned like fire across the paper. Ethan's hand trembled as he traced them, memories slamming into him with brutal clarity. Wallace, his commanding officer years ago in Kandahar, a man as charismatic as he was ruthless. Wallace had taught Ethan the price of obedience, sending soldiers into impossible firefights, then standing clean before the cameras while coffins draped in flags came home. Ethan had buried comrades because of Wallace's orders. And now, here in Silverpine, Wallace's name surfaced again, not as a hero, but as the architect of corruption. Ethan's jaw clenched, the old scar on his cheek whitening as rage knotted in his chest. "Who is he?" Clara asked quietly, watching Ethan's face change. He hesitated, then said, "A man I once trusted. A man who betrayed that trust. And now he's the reason blood runs in this town." Before he could say more, Shadow stiffened. The shepherd's nose pressed to the ground, tracing something in the dust near the table. Ethan followed, kneeling. Paw prints, fresh. But they were not Shadow's. These were smaller, uneven, dragging slightly as though the animal limped. Eliza crouched beside him, her eyes wide. "Another dog," Shadow whined, sniffing the trail again. His ears twitched, his tail low, his body caught between curiosity and unease. Ethan examined the print more closely, the distinctive triangular shape of a trained working dog. His throat tightened. "They've got a K9, he whispered. Or, they had one. Clara's brows furrowed. "But dogs don't choose bad people." Ethan's eyes softened. "No, Clara, they don't. But bad people can choose dogs." His words hung heavy. He imagined a shepherd like Shadow, loyal, fierce, yet bound to men who saw only tools. A soldier betrayed by those it served, much like him. The discovery unsettled Shadow. He circled the prints, nose pressed low, before letting out a mournful sound deep in his chest. Clara and Eliza wrapped their arms around his neck, whispering comfort, though the dog's eyes remained sharp, scanning the shadows. It was as if Shadow felt the betrayal on behalf of his unseen kin, and it only made his loyalty burn brighter. They pressed deeper into the mine, weaving between the crates. At the far end, an alcove carved into the rock revealed more evidence, a corkboard plastered with maps of Silverpine and its surroundings. Red strings stretched between drop points, marked with initials and dates. December 19th glowed like a curse across one corner, circled 3 times in black ink. Ethan's chest tightened. It matched the note Clara had found in his jacket. He pulled it out now, comparing the scrawl. The handwriting was the same. Wallace's hand. As Ethan pieced the threads together, the twins explored the alcove with childish curiosity, edged by fear. Eliza brushed dust from a broken chair, her small hand finding something hidden beneath the seat. She pulled out a photograph, creased and damp. It showed men in uniform, laughing around a campfire. Wallace stood at the center, smiling wide, his hand on the shoulder of a younger Ethan. Eliza brought it to him. "Is this you?" Ethan stared at the photo, the years collapsing in a rush of memory, the night before the mission that cost his friends their lives. Wallace promising them glory, only to vanish when the bullets came. His hands shook as he stuffed the picture into his coat. Proof. Painful, undeniable proof. A sound broke his thoughts. Shadow's ears shot up, his body taut. The shepherd faced the tunnel they had entered, teeth bared, growl echoing against stone. Ethan raised his rifle, motioning the girls behind him. From the dark came faint clatters boots against rock, voices muttering. They were not alone. "Hide," Ethan ordered. He pushed the twins into a crevice behind the crates, Shadow wedging in front of them as a shield. Ethan flattened against the wall, rifle raised, breath shallow. The tunnel's hum grew louder as the intruders drew near. At least 3, maybe more. Their flashlights cut slivers of light into the cavern. One voice spoke, rough and confident. "Boss said, check the stash. Make sure the old man didn't see too much before he bled out." Ethan's blood iced. They thought he was dead. That meant Wallace had given the order himself. He exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing. This was no longer about survival. This was about truth. The morning of December 19th bled gray across the Silverpine ridgeline. The sky low and heavy, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Fog coiled between the jagged silhouettes of mining cranes and rusted conveyor belts, remnants of an industry long dead. The quarry floor was a wasteland of gravel and twisted steel, and in its center stood the stage where betrayal would finally meet truth. Ethan Ward adjusted the rifle strap across his shoulder, his wound bound tightly beneath his jacket. Every movement hurt, but his eyes were steady. Beside him, Shadow crouched low, his coat streaked with frost, amber eyes locked on the clearing. Clara and Eliza clung to each other, their small figures swallowed by pink sweaters dulled with dirt, but their faces fierce in the cold dawn light. The sound of tires crunching gravel broke the silence. An SUV rolled into the clearing, its headlights slicing the fog. The vehicle stopped and 4 men stepped out. Leading them was Wallace Kane. He looked older than Ethan remembered, but not weaker. His hair, once dark, was now flecked with gray at the temples, his broad frame wrapped in a black overcoat. His steel blue eyes scanned the quarry like a general surveying a battlefield, calculating every angle. Flanking him were 3 armed deputies men in dark tactical jackets, their faces hard, hands never far from their weapons. One carried a metal case, its weight obvious in his grip. Wallace's voice cut through the fog, sharp and commanding. "He's here." "I can smell his stubbornness." Ethan stepped forward, rifle at the ready, his figure emerging from behind a collapsed conveyor belt. Shadow padded beside him, silent but lethal. Clara and Eliza remained hidden behind the rusted frame, peering out with wide eyes. "Wallace," Ethan called, his tone even, though rage simmered beneath. "You taught me once about duty, about loyalty. But you forgot the part where it's supposed to serve the people, not your pocket." Wallace's mouth curved into a cold smile. "And you forgot, Ward, that loyalty is only worth something when it's bought. You should have stayed dead." One of the deputies moved to flank, his eyes catching a glimpse of movement. Clara had shifted, too close to the open. Wallace's smile widened. "Well, well. What do we have here? Witnesses?" He nodded toward the girls, his voice chillingly casual. "Take care of them." The order was barely given when Shadow sprang. The German shepherd launched from cover with explosive force, his body a blur of fur and muscle. He struck the deputy mid-step, jaws clamping on the man's arm, forcing his rifle to the ground. Clara screamed, Eliza clutching her hand tighter, but Shadow stood between them and death, teeth bared, growl thundering across the quarry. The sudden chaos shattered Wallace's composure. "Kill the damn dog," he roared. Gunfire cracked, bullets sparking against rusted steel. Ethan ducked low, returning fire with precise, controlled bursts, his soldiers' discipline taking hold. The twins crouched behind the debris, their hearts pounding, but their eyes never left Shadow, who tore and twisted with primal ferocity, protecting them as if his very soul demanded it. In the chaos, Ethan pulled a recorder from his coat pocket. He had activated it earlier, capturing every word since Wallace had stepped into the clearing. "Hear that?" Ethan shouted, voice cutting through gunfire. "Your words are enough to bury you." Wallace's face darkened, his mask of authority cracking. He reached for his pistol, raising it toward Ethan. But before he could fire, a new voice rang out, steady and sharp. "Federal agents! Drop your weapons!" From the tree line, figures emerged in tactical gear, rifles raised, badges gleaming under the pale dawn. At their head strode Agent Rachel Monroe. She was in her late 30s, tall with sharp hazel eyes that cut like glass beneath the brim of her cap. Her copper-brown hair was pulled into a practical braid, and the set of her jaw spoke of years in federal service. Her presence radiated authority, not the corrupt kind Wallace wielded, but the kind forged from truth. Wallace froze, his pistol half raised. "Monroe!" he spat, recognition flashing in his eyes. Rachel's gaze locked on him. "Deputy Marshal Wallace Kane, you are under arrest for conspiracy, trafficking, and attempted murder of a federal witness." Her agents fanned out, surrounding the quarry, rifles steady. "Drop the weapon." For a moment, Wallace hesitated, pride warring with fear. Then he sneered, his voice venomous. "You think this ends with me? You're chasing shadows. Cut off one head, two more grow back." But Ethan stepped forward, rifle still raised, recorder flashing red in his hand. "Maybe, but today one head rolls." Wallace lunged to fire, but Shadow was faster. The shepherd barreled into him, teeth snapping around the man's wrist, forcing the pistol away. Wallace shouted in pain as agents swarmed, tackling him to the ground, pinning him in the gravel. The metal case clattered open, spilling bundles of cash and documents across the quarry floor. The empire Wallace had built crumbled in an instant, exposed to the gray morning. When it was over, silence fell again, broken only by the girl's soft sobs and Shadow's heavy panting. Ethan lowered his rifle, his body trembling, both from exhaustion and from the weight of vindication. Rachel approached, her expression softening as she looked at him, then at the children. "You did what most men wouldn't have survived," she said quietly, "but you don't have to carry it alone anymore." Ethan gave a faint smile, the first in years. "I wasn't alone," he said, looking at Clara, Eliza, and Shadow. Weeks later, Silverpine gathered in the town square. Snow still blanketed the ground, but the air was warmer, filled with voices and hope instead of whispers. A wooden stage had been erected before the courthouse, decorated with garlands of evergreen. At the center, the townsfolk honored those who had pulled them back from the brink. Clara and Eliza, dressed now in fresh coats gifted by neighbors, stood shyly as the sheriff called their names. The townspeople cheered, not just for their courage, but for the innocence they had defended. Ethan stood taller than he had in years, a new steadiness in his posture. The mayor presented him with a medal, his voice carrying across the square. "For valor and sacrifice for facing corruption when silence would have been easier, we thank you." Ethan accepted, his scarred hands trembling slightly, but his eyes calm. For the first time, he felt not exile, but belonging. Then came Shadow. The shepherd walked to the stage beside Clara and Eliza, his coat brushed, a silver medallion shining on a black collar. The inscription read, "Guardian of Silverpine." The crowd erupted in applause, some with tears in their eyes. For them, Shadow was more than a dog. He was the spirit of loyalty that had carried them all through darkness. Finally, a statue was unveiled before the courthouse. Carved from cedar by a local artisan, it depicted Shadow standing tall, flanked by two little girls holding his fur. Their faces lifted toward the sky, hope carved into their wooden features. The statue stood not just as art, but as promise, a reminder that courage could grow even in the coldest winters. Ethan watched from the crowd, his heart heavy and light all at once. For Clara and Eliza, the nightmare was over. For Silverpine, the shadows had been burned away by dawn. And for Shadow, the faithful shepherd, his legacy was no longer just survival. It was redemption. Sometimes miracles do not come with thunder or glory. Sometimes they come in the shape of two frightened little girls, a wounded soldier, and a loyal dog who refused to let go. Silverpine will never forget the night when courage met innocence and loyalty became stronger than fear. And maybe that is the lesson for all of us today. Even in the darkest places, light can still be found if we choose to stand together. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what you would have done if you were there beside Ethan, Clara, Eliza, and Shadow. I read every message and your words matter. Do not forget to like this video, follow the page, and subscribe to the channel so more people can find stories of hope, courage, and healing. Because somewhere out there, someone needs to be reminded that redemption is never too far away.